He's looking pretty casual.
To the county.
Everybody's got the summer look. Yeah.
Get the memo.
Yeah, you and I were screwed up.
Okay. Wow, these really are some mics. Is this what we have in Mill? We don't have. Do we have these in Mill Valley now? These are some mics.
Yeah, they're almost too sensitive.
Yeah. So I was told to announce that Damien will be very upset if we play with the mics. So don't touch them, I guess, apparently. And if you have a voice that's anything close to mine or Greg Stepanovic's, don't even go near them, right? You shouldn't even be allowed to have a mic and then to give you that thing. Yeah, you need yours turned off because yours would just be booming. Well, on that note, I would like to welcome everybody to the June 13, 2012 summer kickoff of the Marin Telecommunications Agency, and here at San Rafael City Hall. So, Suki, your ceremonial call to order, please.
Director Bragman. Here. Director Lambert.
Here.
I got it. Director Lappert. Director Fraser.
Here.
Director Sears. Here. Chairman Berman.
Here.
Director Chu.
Here.
Director Ford.
Here.
And Director Lopin.
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 Thank
Yes,
you.
that's correct.
Say
Thank you.
French, Lopin.
Here. Yeah.
And you got one
Not
more.
French.
You got one more. He's strolling in
Director Levine.
on his
Congratulations.
on his victory lap.
Right.
He's got
You
his
notice he came in
blazer on.
last,
He's
right?
got the
Yeah.
blazer on. The whole. He's already starting the next round of campaign. It's been a good week.
Right.
A little tan, the blazer, the whole. I love it.
He's the
Okay.
poster person for never say never.
All right. Yeah, no, Mark, congratulations from all your colleagues on the board. Well, we appreciate it that you're stepping up like that. Okay, so moving on to item B, are there any comments from directors? No? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to the executive officer's report.
Yes.
Barbara, please.
Chairman and board members, a couple of items tonight to report on. One is you have a sheet in front of you, which is a new format for our operating fund budget. Larry Chu's been working and suggesting formats. I've been working with him on that. And we think that this may be much simpler to be able to see our budget. It identifies the total revenues, then the operating expenses for the agency, come down to our net income, and then other projects to come down to what we actually distribute to the members. And so I just wanted to give this to you FYI tonight, and at our next meeting I will use this for our new budget year, fiscal year 13, going forward, and we'll also show the actuals against it as we go throughout the year. So that's it.
That's it?
Well, I'm sorry, that's it on that.
Oh, on that, okay.
Okay.
Larry, a couple of comments there?
Yeah, a couple comments. One of the things to add to that is when you go to the portion at the bottom that says distribution to members, then you actually just take your percentage from your city, apply it to that, and that's your share. So that's what makes this so simple.
Great, thank you, Larry. Thank you so much for all the work you did on that. The second item is the CAP Act, and I just wanted to give you an update on that. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is now signed on to the CAP Act and has sent letters to all the legislatures at the federal level because part of their mission is a media democracy, media justice platform. So there's that, and they're also looking to try to get the League of Women Voters nationwide to sign on and support this because the public access and PEG stations carry a lot of the League of Women Voters and educate the voters on various topics as well as the citizenry on the community. So that's their new effort. SB in California, SB 1161, which is the deregulation of voice over IP services, did pass in the Senate very quickly. And it's now, this coming Monday, it's going to be heard at the Utilities Committee in the Assembly. So I will get a letter off to and contact Jared Huffman's office on this to indicate that it really needs to slow down so that we can understand fully the implications of it, both for revenues for the cities, as well as the impact on customers with regards to customer services and the PUC being able to handle complaints and that type of thing. So there's really very little information on it. It's a very short bill. It's kind of like DFCA, went through real quickly, and then after the fact, we become aware of the implications. That's all I have to report.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Larry, for your help as well. I think we have a little challenge, though, right? My friends over there, Larry and Mark and myself, I think we should go to the NAR, the National Association of Rabbis, and see if we can get them to step up to the CAP Act as well, too. Don't want just the bishops to have an upper edge on us. Oh, yeah, Michael, wait a minute, we can have Michael, too. And he shaved for the occasion. He shaved, yeah, he's got his summer look, we're all set. The four of us, I think we should write a letter and just insist that the bishop shouldn't have an upper edge on the rabbis. Because it's all in a good cause. Okay, I'm sorry, it's summertime. Okay, so that's fantastic news, though. I'm still curious why the bishop stepped up like that, but. All right, so that's the executive officer's report. Moving on to item D, which is the consent calendar. Unless somebody wants to pull something, then I would entertain a motion to approve.
Move to adopt the consent calendar.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second.
Sears and
Well, actually, Michael was the motion. It wasn't you?
You can have it.
No, you
Okay.
have it. No, Michael has it.
Michael has it.
Michael has
and
it,
Sears.
and the supervisor has a second. So we have a motion and a second. Any opposition? Any discussion? Motion carries unanimously. We move on to item E. So this is an item for public open time for any of the four of you that might want to speak on an item not on the agenda. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and move on to item F, which is the MTA work plan. Barbara, please.
Yes. Before you is the 2012-13 work plan for MTA. This work plan was discussed at the Finance and Policy Committee meeting on May 31st. I got input from the committee, made some adjustments to the work plan, and have attached it here, and I'll go through it in a minute. This work plan does reflect a 20% reduction in the executive officer and administrative staff, as well as a 50% reduction in our board clerk and customer service issues support. This will be reviewed on a quarterly basis by the Finance and Policy Committee. There's 5 major categories in our work plan. The first one is to manage the DAP. We have a DAP renewal coming up in June of 2013, and then continue communicating with the CMCM on an ongoing basis. The second item is to monitor legal regulatory developments and provide direction regarding MTA's interests and needs. This would be on the federal level, on the state level, to provide legal regulatory updates to the MTA board on a regular basis or as otherwise appropriate, and also develop MTA input and facilitate member agency input to various regulatory or legislation as necessary. The third item is the ongoing agency operations, which includes a lot, the overall franchise administrations, customer support for CATV issues, our website launch administration, low-income discount program, and just general agency and board administration items. The fourth item would be the government video programming expansion. We have 4 cities that are interested. Michael's just about to install in Fairfax, and then Ross, San Anselmo, and Larkspur are coming up. The last item would be working with the cities in the county to identify potential interest in opportunities for shared applications. And the first part of this would be to conduct a local government survey of applications, technology, and needs. and then put that together and share it with the city managers as well as the MTA board and see if there are any areas of commonality with interest to move forward on doing shared applications in one, maybe two areas. So that's the work plan.
Are there questions for Barbara? Larry?
On the shared applications, I'd like to see the media center included on any of those discussions, because that, I think, is a vehicle that we can use for shared applications. So, you know, I don't really see that as a separate issue. You know, I see it as an opportunity for the media center to participate in. And again, you know, I think we need to be collaborative with the media center and inclusive, because it can provide a lot of these services in-house. So I would again urge our agency to, you know, take that into account as we move forward with this thing.
Thank you.
Larry?
When we talked about shared applications in the Finance and Policy Committee, it wasn't, now that I think back, it wasn't clear to me what the scope of those applications were. Is it strictly telecommunications or include other things that help to run a government as a business?
It was my understanding it was kind of things that would help to run a government as a business. I mean, if there's some type of software that you would want to use, say, for permitting, or something on the website, or interaction with the community, something like that.
Yeah, I think there are two places we probably should begin any kind of research. First thing is to find out from the Marin Managers Association what they've done in terms of shared applications, because they've already had a number of discussions about shared services.
Yes.
The other thing is, when you look at the county's website on Dave Hill's replacement, that's one of the job descriptors. You know, that is that person's role. So if the county has already taken some lead in it and considered that, you know, your function, then is that something that they will endorse as part of a joint effort, or maybe we should be joining with them to
Well,
work?
I'm assuming, I was gonna mention that I was assuming that the county would be one of the government entities you would
Yes.
talk to about what the county was doing already.
Right, and
applications that could be shared.
Absolutely, because the county has a lot of resources and oftentimes is able to be out in front of some of those things. And I've worked very closely with Barbara Layton and David Hill in the past with regards to what you're doing and taking a look for cities.
Right, and there is permitting software under development, for example. I mean, there are things that the county's already working on that could be useful for other entities. So, but I'm assuming that'll come out in your survey.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions for Barbara?
One other thing, Andy, is, you know, I don't know really what the penetration of fiber is out in West Marin, but it seems to me, you know, finding out whether we really have some underserved areas here in Marin is really directly within the purview of this agency, and it's something that we really have ignored for quite a while. So I would at least like to see us take that up as a discussion item. I don't want to add to her work list, but there's some pretty interesting data at the CPUC that indicates that there are parts of Marin that are not really well served by commercial cable. And I really think we should be aware of it and looking to possibly rectify it at some point or another.
If I could add, I actually have a meeting in a couple of weeks with Horizon Cable to talk with them about coverage out there and getting fiber out there and those types of things, so that I will be fully aware of some of the ideas they may have and where they don't have coverage, and then be able to look at projects, you know, that may come through various government entities or other opportunities.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's some federal funding out there to get it done, so.
Any other questions for Barbara before I open the public hearing? Okay, seeing none, anybody on the public want to speak on this item? Yes, sir. Come on up to the microphone and state your name, please. Sure.
Sorry for being late.
It's all right.
I'm Mike,
Last name?
Mike Nadal,
Mike, nice to meet you.
and I just wanted to business here in really impress upon the board members here that we do a lot more about.
Mike, you might not be being picked up by the mic. There you go. Mike, and Mike.
The button's not on.
It's not on.
You still do great.
Stick to computers, Mike.
Yeah, stick to computer. You're still doing great work, though.
Favorite when,
There you go.
when it's not
There you
plugged
go.
in,
That's
know?
working now.
Okay, all right. Okay, so thanks. Yeah, my name is Mike Nadal, and I'm a business owner here. And what I wanted just to impress upon everyone here is that I've got a lot of clients, and some of them, or all of my clients, are important to me. But you know, especially when I have clients that are, you know, people that live by deadlines and stuff, and you know they have to have it done. And dear God, my computer's down, and I need to get it fixed right away or whatever. The problem that we're having mostly is phone calls from customers who are having problems with Comcast, and either they're the service is going down, it's not working right or whatever. And I understand that this is now a state that, you know, the state controls this here, but I do know that the city of Tacoma in Washington State did something with their independence and did a really nice service for the people there and getting them high-speed internet and cable TV and services of that nature there. So I would recommend that the panel might look to them for advice, or companies that might be able to provide services. But what's critical right now is that everything is really kind of going to the area of a lot of, I don't have to tell you all that everything is really transferring over to the internet in a big way. And when people's personal phones are like, I've got a doctor and she's got kids, and when her phone goes down, her phone's through Comcast. Well, now she's out in the middle of the woods there without a phone, and this makes it really hard for us to be able to help her, and certainly in times of an emergency and stuff of that nature there. So that, and I would really like to see this whole city, the county, in fact, really do a whole better job of employing people who know something about technology, because when you call into an official and they don't know what the heck you're talking about or whatever, it can really be, it's not helpful. And especially with companies that can come from, you know, a totally different country and advertise on Craigslist, for instance, and totally tear your company down and do all kinds of crap way out of your jurisdiction for sure. But what I think that the county can do is ensure that businesses that do advertise here or do try to get business here, to whatever extent possible, be held accountable to the cities here. And honestly, I think that you're losing out. I'm trying to be brief and summarize this, so if I'm skipping parts.
I will cut you off at some point, don't
Yes.
worry. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. But yeah, so I'm trying to be brief. But what I'm saying is that I know that the county is, and the whole state really is, losing out on a lot of tax dollars that they would otherwise get, and that I actually pay because I'm trying to do a legitimate business. But, you know, I've got all this competition that's not paying the same sales tax. And I think that if we did a better job of monitoring this stuff here, you know, I'd be happy to talk with someone and give them more details. But that's what I would like to present today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Anybody else from the public want to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, bring it back to the board for any discussion or other direction to staff. Larry?
Regarding that last set of statements, I guess if we constructively try and figure out how we can address, the issues he brought up. I guess we should separate what is within the jurisdiction of the MTA and what others may be covered by agencies either in Marin or, in the case of sales tax related stuff, it would seem like it's the Franchise Tax Board or the State Board of Equalization. I don't know how we are able to address all the items you brought up, but I'm just wondering what we can do on the things that are within our jurisdiction.
Well, I can tell you one of the biggest problems, it all started with a transient occupancy tax, which is what a lot of cities, especially chambers of commerce in our town, live and die by, with the tax revenues from hotels, et cetera. But when those are booked through the internet, we don't get that revenue. And of course, most bookings are through the internet now. So this problem is an ongoing problem that transcends all businesses right now, especially for cities that are trying to recover sales tax, because there's no way to do it when it's done from Indiana, obviously.
Yeah. Well, the one question that came up was the Comcast issue, and that is a support issue to some degree. But knowing my friends and neighbors, call up, my internet doesn't work. And it's like, well, are you wireless? And usually that's the case. Well, I think you need to try and reset your wireless access point first. And usually that solves it, but I don't know of other people that you're experiencing actually having delivery problems in terms of the internet service itself. And if that's...
Yeah, they're not getting the speed that Comcast promises them. They're not getting what they're paying.
Any other question, or Jim?
Larry, just a question. Do we have the ability with Comcast to get information in terms of the reported failures with internet service and what that failure may or may not have been?
Yeah. The problem we have is that we have no regulatory authority over internet service. So that was decided actually a while ago, both first by an FCC decision, which was then affirmed by the courts. So for local entities under the Telecommunications Act, the regulatory power is over cable service, video service, but not internet type services. And so that is an area now we are preempted from trying to regulate.
If I might, just 15 seconds. One of my main points I wanted to say was, if the cities at this point here can actually buy their own internet services and sell them to the citizens for really wirelessly for a discounted price. I meant to say that earlier, by the way. And you can solve all your problems because people, any bookings or whatever that would be done through your website, you can track.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? So I just want to say a couple things. So this work plan, just so the board understands this, we spent a lot of time at the Finance and Policy Committee going over this. And I guess, 30 seconds on what this is and what it isn't. It starts with the umbrella that Barbara, Suki, and Carla are all on reduced staff time. That's why our budget is lower, because we've asked them to step back and we've provided some operational efficiencies by doing so, and a little bit further fees to the cities. So we've primarily asked her to focus on managing the DAP. That is working first and foremost closely with our friends and colleagues at the Media Center. That's what that really means. And we'll have an agenda item later tonight about what we do about a renewal on the DAP agreement itself. There is, we heard loud and clear that there was an ongoing need for the kinds of updates that we're getting from Greg and Barbara, and we want to keep that as a top priority. So this list that you're looking at is actually the focus and actually the priorities. To Mr. Nadal's points, to Larry's points, some of the other comments we've gotten, and Greg's clarifications of what we can and can't do, our ongoing role as a public forum for these issues remains intact, front and center. And if there are questions, comments, complaints, or concerns that residents have, then they should be brought to the MTA. That is why we're here. So appreciate your comments tonight. And Suki, a big piece of her job is just to take complaints from residents that get delivered to Comcast. And we have an ongoing relationship with the government affairs side of Comcast.
I spoke yesterday at length to Mr. Nadal, and I
Yeah.
suggested that he write a letter to our executive officer detailing some of his problems.
Excellent. And then the last, the last two items on here are just items that we had asked Barbara to think about but not get embroiled in. And then what's not here, you'll notice, is any work on trying to pull Novato in. The Finance and Policy Committee just kind of said to itself, rather than us trying to be proactive as we have been for the last few years, if Novato wants in, let it state its case to why it comes in, and let's figure out why it would want in and what the impacts would be. So just a very focused approach, and we did that really also in fairness to staff because we are asking less of them. So that's just, just some context on that. All right, so Barbara, do you have any questions? You know what you're signed up for here and what we're expecting of you?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, and this was all reflected in our review a couple of months ago. Okay, let's move on to item G, which is the proposed budget and a public hearing and approval of that, which we had at an earlier meeting, I think in May. So go ahead, Barbara, please.
Yeah, I'll go through this
Oh,
quick.
wait a minute. Procedurally. Kate noticed that the bylaws have an inaccuracy on our schedule, given that we also approved in the consent budget a revised schedule. So do I really have to reopen the consent calendar, Greg, or can I just give direction to staff now that we need to, those section 4 of the bylaws dictate our meeting schedules, and we just change them in item 3?
We probably have to update.
We're going to have to update that separately.
Yeah, okay, so do I have to do a new motion on the consent calendar, pull item 3?
No, because we're going to have to do that. That was not noticed for a change. I mean, it's really
Okay.
ministerial here, but we're still going to have to go through
Yeah,
the process of
that's
amending
what-
the bylaws to do
Okay.
that. Because it requires us to notice it in advance of actually taking action on the item.
So the
It's a
motion to
two-meeting.
approve the consent calendar stands, but we're going to have to give direction to staff now to bring that back with a...
We have the
with a-
direction. We will now take care of that.
Great, okay, thank you, Kate. Gosh,
If I'd
this is
spoken
lovely.
up earlier, it would have been easier, but.
It's fine.
Well,
But we still couldn't have changed
we
it,
have
though,
to do a
tonight.
two-meeting process for updates to the bylaws. So until we had approved tonight the new meeting schedule, then,
So we can't, yeah, so that's fine.
fair.
So the bylaws won't
We're
catch
right
up.
on
And we're not
schedule.
breaking the
Yeah.
bylaws until we actually go to those meetings?
Yes, perfect. All right, good. Okay, so now on to item G, the budget.
yes, the action here is to receive the proposed budget, conduct a public hearing, and then adopt the fiscal year 13 budgets for both of our funds and the attached resolution. The MTA, as I mentioned, has two funds. One is our operating fund and the other is the PEG fund. In the operating fund this year, it's the revenues and expenses are essentially flat from fiscal year 12 at $3,703,000. The agency's budget is approximately $326,000, and that's a 21% decrease for the agency budget from our fiscal year 12. The expenses that are decreased in order to achieve that reduction are legal expenses, our agency staff, and the one-time expense for developing our new website. In addition, this budget includes a couple of things that are projects. One is the $20,000 for the low-income discount, $23,000 for the CMCM Midas INET connection, and then there's $15,000 for contingency projects that may come up during the year. In the PEG fund, it's up considerably from what our original budget was for fiscal year 12, although about the same as our current revised budget for fiscal year 12 for the PEG fund. And the revenues in this fund are what we get from the cable TV companies and PEG fees or settlement fees. And we're showing what comes in, goes out at $432,000 for this upcoming year.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Any questions for Barbara on the budget? This did come to the Finance and Policy Committee. Lori?
My question is regarding the legal fees. I understand that the legal fees have been very high because of the whole debacle with Comcast and needing to go to court, but they've only gone down by about $13,000, and I was curious why they aren't lower.
They're down $35,000. This past year, our budget was $65,000 for legal fees, and the new year is $30,000.
So I picked up that the legal fees for this last year were $43,167, so.
That's the actual so far this year.
Oh, but there
The
is more
budget-
that's going to be coming up then?
Yes.
So it is decreased considerably then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We will come under budget of what we had in the budget this year. The $65,000 will come in under that, but there's still more fees to come on top of the $43,000 we've incurred so far.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Barbara? Larry?
I'm still not clear what our reserve is from this budget. So I'm just wondering, I know we've got another item coming up about the reserve policy, but I couldn't figure out what our reserves were from the budget.
This budget doesn't reflect putting anything into reserves, because what we generally do is whatever we get in, we take out the agency budget, and then we pass on the rest of the PEG fees to the members. Now, at the end of the year, if our actual budget is under what our approved budget is, then we may end up with some money in reserves. And this year, we will have some in that. Generally, what I do is, as I mentioned before, we had kept about $150,000 level in our reserves in the past. Anything above that, I would give back to the cities as we made the second quarter payment on the franchise fees, because at that point in time, we knew that we had underrun our budget for the current year.
Didn't we have a reserve, though, like from prior years? As I recall,
Yes.
that's what we were paying for the Comcast litigation costs and so on.
Right. That was the $150,000 that I mentioned. And we have, this year, we're going to underrun our budget, so that increases it up on top of the $150,000, probably by about $50,000 to $70,000. So the reserve is, at any point in time, what our budget is, our reserve at the end of the year is when we compute what the actual reserve is based on what we budgeted versus what our actual expenditures were.
I think
Isn't
Larry's-
there a carryover reserve from last year or did we use it all on
No,
legal fees?
we didn't use it all. There's a
Well,
carryover.
is it a line item on this budget that reflects the carryover from last year
No,
as a
it-
reserve?
No, there's not.
Okay.
Is there a reserve? Did you just disperse it, or did we disperse it to the cities?
We, at the end of last year, we retained a reserve of about $150,000. Anything, at that point, we had like maybe over $200,000. And so I gave that additional amount back, over 150. That all went back to the cities at the end of the year.
Right, but then there was still the 150, and did we spend down the entire 150 in reserves?
We did not spend any of the reserves this year.
Do you know what the carryover amount of the reserves is? That we would have now in reserves before you do the end of the year
Yeah.
calculation?
I don't recall what it is right now.
Okay. Seems like it'd be good to have a line item for that.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I think I can address that. I don't remember the number, but if we had 150,000 in reserves, we basically reduced our member contribution by 130,000 this year. So you can figure that the carryover reserve is roughly about 20,000. Okay, but what we don't have in our financials right now is the equivalent of a balance sheet or statement of assets that would show our equity as it transfers from one year to the next. This revised budget format that I've been working with Barbara on will show the increase and the decrease to reserves as a current year portion of the equity. But if you want to be able to see that, we need to also produce a statement of assets along with the financials.
So I think what you're hearing is we'd like to know what that number is.
Yes.
And even if it's tracked, even as a separate line item, with the understanding that it's not going to be a formal statement of assets. And you should work with Barbara, I guess, on just making sure we see that. Okay, any other questions for Barbara? I'm going to open up the public hearings. Anybody on the public want to talk on this matter? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, bring it back to the board for any discussion or deliberation or a motion.
I guess I could move to accept the FY 12-13 budget.
I'll second that.
Chair, before we do that, Chair, there's just one other item that I meant to mention, if I could reopen.
So what we can actually have a discussion on the motion.
On the previous year, there's a line item for the low-income discount of 20,000, which
Budget.
so that was for fiscal year 12. And my understanding is that we haven't spent any money
Right.
on the low-income discount yet.
So that would be a carryover item.
That would be, okay, so,
It'd end up in reserves at the end of the year.
correct. But I just want that noted, because on the budget that we were going to approve, that's shown as an expenditure for the 2012 budget. So, are we still waiting to get that going?
Yeah, I've been trying to set up a meeting with the Housing Authority to finalize their validation of the applications we get. And I hope to do that, get that within the next week. They've been very busy.
Okay. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, so we have a motion, a second. We had a little discussion on it. Any opposition to the any further discussion on the motion? Any opposition to the motion? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, let's move on. Thank you, everybody, for that. Good discussions. Let's move on to item H, which is a discussion on the distribution of the new Comcast PEG revenues.
Okay. On this item, recommendation is to discuss this and then consider approval of allocating $156,000 Comcast lump sum payment to the CMCM now on a one-time basis, pending approval of a policy or DAP contract amendment or renewal. The second item is to provide advice and direction to staff and the DAP Renewal Committee on further allocation of new Comcast PEG revenues. And the third item is to have the DAP Renewal Committee consider PEG revenue allocation in its work on the DAP renewal. And the DAP Renewal Committee is a subsequent item on our agenda tonight. So the background here is that we did have the settlement with Comcast where we will have received $156,000 in a lump sum payment and will receive approximately $325,000 a year in additional PEG settlement fees. The current DAP speaks to our automatically passing through the AT&T PEG revenues and does not speak to Comcast. The board currently has approved designating the PEG fees that we get from a small Comcast unincorporated franchise in Novato, as well as the Horizon PEG fees, that those would be allocated to fund the video services installations in new cities and then to repay the cities that have already incurred video installation costs. Given what we have in revenues on that currently and the current rate that they come in at about $28,000 a year, it'll take about 2 years to be able to fund those projects. Also, the current DAP expires June 30th, 2013. So, as I mentioned, passing through the $156,000 is recommended by the Finance and Policy Committee. They did discuss the issue regarding the $325,000 a year that we would receive on a going forward basis till approximately August of 2017. And trying to balance the oversight and fiduciary responsibilities to cable subscribers along with the important public policies to support the CMCM. They agreed and recommended that the sums be allocated to the CMCM. However, they did not have a consensus about when or how these would be allocated and if there would be any restrictions. So tonight, the FMP committee would like the board to provide input and discuss whether they want to allocate the CMCM, the full amount, a specified percent, or a specific dollar contractually, with the remaining portion distributed by the MTA at its discretion or during the annual budget process. Any contractual approach locks the MTA into the required payment for the remaining term of that contract. The second alternative is to allocate the full amount or a specified percent or dollar amount at the MTA's discretion or during the annual budget process. And the FMP committee did not recommend, or does not recommend allocating sums with restrictions on use, preferring instead to manage the CMCM through the DAP.
So let me just, thank you. I'm going to open it up for questions for staff, and then we'll have a public hearing. But so the Finance and Policy Committee did meet extensively on this item too. A very good discussion. The reason this, all the way our JPA is set up, all monies flow through this entity right here. So you have to bring this issue to the board. We cannot just distribute monies without board action. So that's number one. Number two, there are the two sums of money. So think about those. We looked at them separately and made recommendations separately, although pretty much the same recommendation. So on the settlement money, we said to ourselves, look, this was a settlement. This is in lieu of litigation. It ought to go right over there. It was representative of fees that would have otherwise gone over that direction anyway. There should be really not much further discussion on that. Where we wanted some advice, direction, and consultation from the board was on the $325,000. Do we do it like we've done in the DAP agreement, where we've said the AT&T sums go right over? Do you want to do this contractually? Do you want to do this in discretion, in our discretion? Do you want to do it annually? We just we want this money to go over to the media center. That was our recommendation. It's just, how does the board feel about how that gets done and when that gets done? We did have a discussion about, and we have had this discussion up here, and we had the discussion at the Finance and Policy Committee as well too, is, do you send money over and say we want you to put it towards G channel, E channel, P channel, and the media center, and we had a discussion over the DAP agreement itself. That's really the mechanism where we figure out how we would like our designated access provider to act. So that's what that last line really means there, is give them the money, let them, assuming we make a decision to give them the money, let them do with the money as they see fit, understanding that they've got to live up to the terms of a designated access provider agreement, which led to the discussion of being proactive about a DAP renewal, creating a committee to think about that DAP renewal and get ourselves effectively a year in advance on that, and use that device to manage our relationship versus how we have the money flow. All right, so that's kind of the context to this discussion. Are there any questions for me or Barbara or members of the Finance and Policy Committee? Lori.
Excuse me, I'm going to use my excuse, being new.
It's okay. That's good.
So this is ideally the 1% for the franchise fees that are supposed to come over. Now, where is it stated how those fees are supposed to be used? Is that something within the Comcast or the state agreements? Where is it that it starts, and does it say it goes directly over to the community video, call it CMCM? How does this work? I just want to know what the parameters are.
Well, we treat fees in two different ways. The franchise fees are spelled out in the JPA agreement, the formation agreement for this agency, spelled out how those franchise fees were to be handled. With PEG fees, there's no agreements among the agencies addressing that, except that with regards to the DAP agreement with CMCM, there was a contractual obligation for the MTA to pay over the AT&T franchise fees to the DAP provider. And at that point in time, there was no expectation that Comcast would be paying to us PEG fees at this point in time. But it was, in case it happened, it was left open for determination at a later time for how that would be done. So at this point in time, the board's really, working with a open slate here as to how it wants to define how the Comcast PEG fees and would be handled at this time.
Okay, but the fees have to go over in the first place, right? The PEG fees have to go to the provider of the...
No, the PEG fees go to the MTA.
Right, and the MTA...
So after that point, with respect to, because they're coming from, now from a couple different sources. They're coming from Comcast, they're coming from Verizon, they're coming from AT&T. And currently, the contract with CMCM provides for the AT&T fees all to be paid over. But that's it. So we haven't addressed this at all yet. So that's why, that's the purpose now of getting a decision by the board as to how those monies should be handled.
So theoretically, what you're saying then is the PEG fees could come to the MTA and then they just stop there?
They could.
They do not have to be forwarded on?
Legally, they do not need to be forwarded on. So really, it's a policy judgment as to how you want to handle those fees.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's true. I mean, I just to clarify one point, they can't be used for general purposes. They are restricted for public, educational, governmental purposes.
They're not franchise.
They're not franchise.
They're not franchise.
Yes,
Okay,
but in terms of where they end up going to, it's your discretion to decide for PEG purposes how those monies are spent.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Lori, did you have any other questions?
No.
Who said chair? Oh, Michael. Who had it first?
Greg, doesn't the DIVCA statute spell out that the 1% should go for PEG purposes? I mean, when I read it, it actually spells it out pretty clearly. It spells out what the requirements are, and it actually specifies, it actually mentions, that it can go to the what it calls the designee.
Well, yeah, although what it spells out is that it's paid to the local entity. And so that's what DIFCA states. And then it does leave it up to the local entity how that would be handled. And the reason is for each local entity, it's done differently. I mean, some local entities operate their own PEG facilities. Others have a contract with a DAP provider and so on. So that's why there's no specification ultimately as to how those monies get spent by the local entity receiving the fees, other than they have to be used for PEG purposes.
By the agency or its designee. And my point is that we have a contractual relationship with an organization as a designee. So I don't see it as a particularly complex issue for us to simply amend the DAP.
Okay, can you do me one favor? I love you dearly, but let's keep it to questions, have the public, and then we'll have our.
Okay, well, I'm commenting on what I feel is a legal obligation under the statute to use the funds in a certain way.
I know, but that's deliberations, Larry. Can we just get through the process here? I'm so fond of you, you know that.
I understand that, but it just seems like we're relitigating issues that have already been decided years ago.
We had a Finance and Policy Committee meeting, we didn't have this meeting, and this has to come to the board. I know you don't like it, but
what I have an issue with is relitigating what we're doing with PEG.
Okay, fair enough.
It creates a lot of insecurity and anxiety.
It doesn't.
Doesn't the board have the right to set milestones and for that allocation of funds?
Yes.
I would encourage us to go through that process, to set reasonable milestones and not just write a blank check.
Right, but those milestones are set forth in the DAP agreement.
Okay, hold on, guys. Let's not do our deliberations now. That's the issue. Please don't. Let's just ask questions, get clarifications, have a public hearing, then we can have this as an excellent discussion. The next question was from Michael. Did you have a question?
Yes.
Thank you.
My question will be, given that with money comes power, and so does politics and infighting and all kinds of things, and that group over there are the artists and we are the bad guys, I find that when you give money, once you hand over the money, who over there is sort of like writing the checks and keeping track of stuff, or are we doing that for them? Or the question is there some other filtration system going on over there so that we don't
No, not yet.
so we don't cause them
That's
problems?
the DAP agreement. right? That's the point in here. That's the DAP agreement. So we had discussions here. I'm answering a question. We had discussions up here saying, should we put strings on it when it goes over? What the Finance and Policy Committee came to, and this is up for debate, because this is, this is a team here, was let's not give it to them saying you got to spend it here, there, and there. Let's use the DAP agreement for what it is. That's our mechanism for lack of a better term, managing the media center and what they do. Michael, I think, actually writes the checks and everything.
Right.
But he operates inside of the DAP agreement.
But, so the question is that if you hand over the money, then they get to decide whether or not they
As long as they don't breach the DAP.
I understand.
That's why the DAP's so important.
But here in come the politics. So they get to decide, for example, whether or not a large portion of programming goes to, I don't know, welfare moms, and a small portion goes to welfare dads, just as or whatever it is. I mean, they make those programming decisions, which tend to get politicized.
Inside the DAP, though, that's where
I see.
The DAP is where we can say we'd like focus on education or focus on government.
I understand. Okay.
So
by giving them a large portion of money, we're not going to put them in a situation, chunks of money at a time, we're not going to put them in a situation where they are arguing amongst themselves.
I don't think so, as long as,
that would be that's my only concern.
Yeah. Does anybody argue amongst themselves? Potentially.
Yes, but I mean,
seriously, they should follow the DAP.
They're in here screaming at us because he told me that we were going to do this, and now
that was their point. That's been their argument over the last couple of years, is saying, look, if you don't like what we're doing over here, we're just following the DAP.
Got it. That answered a lot of the questions.
Yep, okay. Who was next? I don't...
Yeah, this is just kind of fascinating to me. I like the idea of the DAP being all-encompassing. Maybe there's like some flexibility that's in it. But, if we end up with a, extra set of funds, or if there's money for us to direct, and let's say we wanted there to be more sunshine on, for example, sewer issues, and we were to direct some production company to make sure that all of these sewer agencies were televised, or at least videotaped. And then we wanted to have, on our governmental channel, all of those meetings on TV. Like, we really want to put people to sleep. That I guess would be, and that's kind of what my question is that the type of, just as an example, an example of direction that we would be using, for good or bad, that we're talking about?
Well, I mean, I think the agreement was premised on the idea that the
how
agreement,
far can we go
frankly, of not getting into just deciding what the programming should be. And it was very carefully worded to really leave it to the DAP to decide on the programming. There were general criteria given as to the type of things that should be done by the DAP, and that was what they were required to do in terms of their performance standards, in terms of providing training and providing certain levels of programming and that type of thing. But definitely not to decide, for this body to decide what type of shows should be put on. That was not the idea at all. The idea was to leave that in the hands of the DAP, which is a good idea, because the board does not want to get into this idea of where money what shows should be put on the air.
Programming is one part of my question. The other question was, of course, production. So if we had funding for education or public or governmental, and we said, we think that we should be producing areas of interest that again, for good or bad, that the MTA decides is a priority. So we want to hire a production company to make these types of programs. Whether or not under the DAP agreement they choose to actually include that as programming, that'd be another point. But that's another example of how we could direct those funds to be used.
That is true. In other words, I mean, right now the responsibility for producing all types of programming was put into the DAP, but nothing would stop the MTA itself to fund governmental programming by its members if that was something that you wanted to do.
Okay.
So that is a choice that could be made.
Thank you.
Jim.
This discussion may be ahead of, the public comment, so if it is, I'll just tell me, Jim will catch that later. But the thing that I think it would be important, because we've talked about it for the last couple of years, achievements, milestones, and things of that sort. And so money's coming our way, I think, should be tied to achieving certain milestones. I don't think the board should get into the minutia of managing programming, but I do think that milestones should be established. And so I wouldn't necessarily be a fan of writing a blank check kind of like the beginning of the year and saying, fine, I'd like to go in increments based on achieving milestones.
Okay. I was going to ask Greg, can the DAP include, I was going to see if the DAP could include milestones if you
Sure.
wanted to do that.
That could be done too.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So one way to do that is through the DAP, but I think you're also saying something different, which is you would be, and I don't want to get into this, you would be, it sounds like you would be more into
Macro milestones, not minutia.
but doing that sort of in our discretion and during the year versus contractually.
I would be in favor of just, allocating it during the year.
Okay, all right, so let's hold on that. So any other questions for anybody, staff, really? Larry's going to, okay, we're going to.
I have a question.
Yes.
Doesn't the DAP already do this? Don't we already have milestones set in the DAP? There's programming requirements. There's about 3 or 4 pages of milestones. Now, are we going to reopen this so that we can re-argue it? That's my question.
Okay.
Aren't we under an agreement? Aren't we already in an agreement that sets milestones that they've met?
Hold on, okay. That was a rhetorical question.
It's both.
Okay. And it was a multiple question.
Yeah. Well, this is the point here, though, is that the provisions of the DAP agreement cannot be amended except by mutual agreement of the parties during the term of the agreement. That's standard principle here. But what is left open here still is the idea, what happens to the Comcast money? I mean, that's the issue here. And that agreement just was silent on that at that time and was left for a future determination. And that's where we are right now. The money has been received. The board has to decide how that gets done. And the options are, as laid out in the staff report, that the agreement could be amended to contractually obligate these monies to go to CMCM, and that be within the confines then of the standards of that agreement. I mean, it would be up to the board, could say, okay, we'll send that money over to the DAP, but we want some additional milestones or performance standards. However, that would have to be agreed to by CMCM because that's an amendment to the agreement. So that would have to be a mutual understanding that those would be additional milestones that were done. The other alternative, as set forth in the staff report here, is that in lieu of a contract amendment, you would just receive the DAP monies and then allocate those monies during the year to CMCM, just for your own powers as being the recipient of those monies. And so those are the two different approaches that have been presented to you this evening, and that's what you really are deciding as to what mechanism to use to how to get those monies used and put to productive use for PEG purposes. Right now, PEG is only being produced by CMCM, and it's, we don't have some separate operation also producing programming right now. So, I mean, that is the vehicle that's currently being used to produce all types of programming.
There was some discussion at the Finance and Policy Committee when there was discussion, but also I think disagreement. When does the DAP? Because you said that's an amendment to the DAP. Does it expire in June of when's it? So June of
2013,
and there's no renewals on that.
It's up to mutual agreement of the parties. There was
Are we in the last year of it?
What's that? Well, we're into the last year. There already was a renewal based upon meeting the performance standards of the agreement.
Right.
And that was extended for 2 years. That was done based upon compliance with the contract. The board had no discretion there as long as CMCM was in compliance with the contract. At this point in time, when you get to this part of the contract, which ends in 2013, it's up to the parties to agree to extensions of the agreement, which would be by mutual agreement of the parties.
Right. So I mean, the only thing I'm challenging is anything we do between now and June of 13 is an amendment. If we just don't renew the agreement, it becomes a new agreement.
Yeah, then everything next year is an amendment. Anything that's incorporated into the new agreement, and that can be done a couple different ways. At that point in time, you may simply continue the same agreement with amendments, extending the agreement, or you may have a new agreement, a new restated agreement for the new term. That's up to everyone to decide at that point in time.
Any other questions for Larry?
Yeah, have we gotten any information that CMCM hasn't met the performance standards and metrics that are required under the DAP?
No, that's why the contract was extended already. But the thing is, the way the contract works is that automatic, what I would call an automatic extension, provided there was full compliance with the contract, that extension already occurred. So the way the contract was set up, there was one automatic extension, and then after that, it's based on the mutual agreement of the parties.
But my point is, isn't it true that it was extended because it was in full compliance with all terms and conditions, correct?
Right, that's correct.
And since it's been renewed, it's been in compliance with all further terms and conditions. Isn't that correct? We haven't had any.
Okay, wait a minute.
Yeah,
How's your how's it feel to be in the chair under cross-examination?
Well, can I direct it towards the executive director? I mean, since it's been renewed, isn't it a fact that CMCM has met all the performance standards under the DAP?
Yeah, Larry, please stop. I mean, I love you dearly. We know that. The first agreement,
Do we?
if they were in compliance, they got an automatic renewal. It's done. We're over with that. The second time around was mutual agreement. We're done with that. In June of 13, it's got to be mutual agreement. We've established that. We know they're doing a good job. That's why they got the renewal. Okay? Come on. Let's be. We got to be really productive. I'm sorry, and I really like you a lot, but we just got to just. Do you have any other questions, please? Real questions for them?
I guess not. It seems like the discussion is being directed
a
You're certain
making
way.
it. I got to tell you, it's not. It's not a bad discussion, but a lot of these people have not heard this stuff. We're obligated. Mark brought that up at the light. We're obligated to bring this to the board. It's not. I mean, just Are there any other questions for staff? I'd like to open up the public hearing, please, on this item. Welcome back.
Good evening. It's great to be back in the United States, I can tell you that.
In 85-degree weather here, it's still cooler than where you've been, right?
It's wonderful to be back for more reasons than just the temperature, I can tell you that. The ability to speak freely here and to speak to a mixed group is absolutely wonderful. I just wanted to address a couple of things. First of all, it is true that the CMCM does have in the DAP a number of performance standards, a number of restrictions and obligations, and we take them very, very seriously, and we have been exceeding them throughout the time that we're here. And so we would agree with you that standards are important, and as long as they're mutually agreed to and they're consistent with the law and they're reasonable, we have no problem with that whatsoever. We need to be accountable for the money. We do come to the board on a regular basis and we report what we're doing here. The board has a responsibility to administer the public commons, which is what this is. This franchise grants the board and the public here the right to have access to all those 60,000 faces or more that are watching the cable channel. And it's just like the Boston Commons, exactly like that. You know, for the last, I don't know how many 100 years, Boston has been maintaining their commons, and you can go there today and you'll see the city government takes care of it, and people go there and they meet and they talk and they do stuff, and that's exactly what we have here as an electronic commons. It's this board's responsibility to carry out that responsibility for taking care of it, and the board set up the CMCM originally. It is an independent 501c3, and it does have some independence. It is totally dependent for its existence on this board. So we would ignore your guidance at our peril, but we do have a certain degree of independence. We, however, do not exercise the kind of editorial control that you might have thought we would like to exercise. We are allowed, we carry programming mostly produced by volunteers, by the community, and that's brought to us. We do produce a small amount of programming with PEG money, very small amount, but it's typically, I don't know, Michael could speak to that. I won't say with a percentage, but I believe it's way less than 10% of the programming. Most of it is produced by volunteers. We provide the means to produce it. We're an educational group, and so we teach people how to produce. We teach them how to tell their stories, and we carry those stories, and we carry them from government. So in the case of government, and I think my friendly local council person here is aware that there are agencies that do sponsor some kinds of programming. For example, the Water District sponsors some conservation programming. They paid for it out of their funds. They have a responsibility and a duty to communicate with the public about those issues, and they paid for it, and they carried it. I believe it was produced by Novato Public Access, not by the one I'm thinking of, not by CMCM, but we would typically carry those as well. So there is a vehicle for government when it has a communications need to pay for that, not necessarily out of the PEG fees. And the PEG fees at the moment, there'll be questions of adequacy and so on, so I won't go into that in any length. But in general, we do not exercise editorial control. We do exercise some control over things that might violate the law or the community standards. So if in the case we get something that's reported as being potentially obscene or slanderous or something of that sort, our board does take action to either sanction that producer or take other steps as might be appropriate in our policy. So we do exercise that kind of a policy, but we don't, for example, pre-screen things. Producers sign a legal agreement that they are responsible for their content, and that's one of the protections that I think Greg is referring to in terms of the protection for the board here, is that we take a certain amount of responsibility for that behavior, and we do have some risk. We do have to carry board insurance, for example. So it's not a completely free-for-all kind of a situation, and we do not have arguments at our meetings about whether we should be sponsoring welfare moms or welfare dads. That does not occur. We do not do that. And in fact, if there are times that board members, especially new ones, would say we should be sponsoring a particular type of programming, and typical answers at the board are we can't do that. So, but that's a very good question, and I'm glad that you asked it, because for people who aren't aware of what the limits are of what we can do, that's just as important as what we can do. And so those limits are something we take seriously. I'm not going to speak too long because Michael has some more important things to talk about, but I did want to mention the idea that we do take the standards seriously, and they can be negotiated and they can be adjusted as time goes on. They require us to be fair in the allocation, so we are a fair broker for that access. And of course, and now as more and more city councils want to have a meeting on the same night and there's only one channel, that becomes a bit of a delicate item. But we try not to get in the way of public entities on TV. The same with education. We try to make sure that's fair. And with public access, again, we have a responsibility for fairness there. And so we do set some themes, and we do have some thematic direction on certain nights. It might be one kind of programming, it might be some on another, but within that theme, we typically don't exercise any editorial control. So I think that was kind of what I was wanting to speak to. I think we appreciate very much the support the board has provided. We are challenged financially, and if there's we do have a capital program, so we have been cooperative with the board in the past and can expect to be in the future to make sure that what little capital we have left does get allocated in a way that's in the public interest, in the best interest, and we're responsive to the board's priorities. So we've been working very closely with the cities to improve the video services delivered there. And I would just mention in closing that not only are the PEG fees the key and the sort of the central funding mechanism that we have here, but there is the ability for cities to augment that, as some have chosen to do, and to buy additional services or put in better quality facilities, to equip, for example, community centers, that sort of a thing. So there's a variety of options there in funding. You have a question?
Okay. So if somebody hands you a check for $150,000, how much of that is going to be spent on something other than production?
Michael, would you like to speak to that?
Oh, and I'll wait for the answer from Michael. Thank you.
Executive Director.
There you go.
I'm a board member, so I look at the budget, but he's not.
Okay, yeah, we don't accept donation earmarked for certain types of programming. We can't. By federal law on the community channel, we have absolutely no discretion over the programming. Whatever anyone brings to us, we have to program. It's a law. If we violate that, we're actually putting you at risk. So unless the programming is illegal, as Bruce pointed out, if it's libelous or pornographic or commercial, we have to program it. So We actually don't really produce programming. I mean, most of the time when staff get involved in productions, they're doing it on their own time. Like just a couple weeks ago, we did the Pacific's opener. That was, we had 7 members and staff from CMCM doing that work all on our own time. Because we wanted to, and there's a possibility of getting some, funding for high school sports coverage down the road that we really want to fund, and we thought this might be a good push for that. But yeah, we couldn't accept funding if it was earmarked specifically for programming, unless it's for fee-for-service programming that would be airing primarily on government or education.
If I may clarify, I guess you get $100,000, and generally what happens, like with government, if we tax people, the first thing we do is how can we make our little nest bigger? How can we make our government more governmental, as opposed to actually giving the service that we're supposed to be taxing for? So when you get that $100,000, how much of it will be spent on, say, you will have to add someone to do some bookkeeping or to do something other than what your real job really is? Or is that not a real fair question, because all of you is administrative and you just kind of provide equipment and resources?
Yeah, I mean, we're primarily trainers and facilitators.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
my job
That answers the question.
changes from every, day to day. But anyway, I mean, it's a very good question. It's important that everyone understands what it is that we're called upon to do. I mean, administering the community channel in a way that's very equitable and fair and legal, but also providing all the services that we do for members of the community to get low-cost training, access to equipment. Those are very important. All those services are available to educational institutions as well as government agencies, and we've had staff from libraries and governments come and take our classes, and they're in there using the equipment too. Now the government channel takes a different kind of administration. I mean, that's gavel-to-gavel coverage. We follow a very stringent policy. Nothing is edited. The only thing that airs on the government channel is government programming. We'll bring in the candidate debates if they're sanctioned by a body like the League of Women Voters. But that's a channel we administer, schedule, program, do all the work for government. But that's a certain type of programming. The two doesn't mix with the community. And then the education channel is reserved, by and large, for educational programming. Our task has been to try and get, schools involved and universities and colleges. And when we don't have enough involvement, we try to find other educational content to air on that. And we have a little bit of flexibility on that channel to use it on weekends as more of a hybrid. So if there's a sporting event or a 3-hour workshop that was done in the community, we'll consider that an educational event. But those are the kind of challenges we face. But in terms of determining the type of programming, it's something we don't really have any control over. Our job is the community needs assessment that was done before all of this started, determine what the needs were in the community. Our job is to try and fulfill those needs. And it's really about listening to the community and seeing, where the holes are and trying to provide the services where they're needed most. But your questions about finances, I wish we could fight over where the money goes, but, it's not enough money to fight over. But just to give everyone kind of a clear picture, I mean, over the last 4 years, we've received about $3 million from the MTA, which were the original fees from Comcast, plus some minor AT&T fees that have been growing incrementally. So maybe about $3.3 million over this period. Out of that, and we haven't run off with it. Out of that, we still have, just over $1 million in the bank. About $950 is in an investment account that's earning about 4 to 5%. Very smart. We're earning interest. We're banking that money very carefully. That's considered our capital reserve. We've been in operation 3 years. In 2 years, a lot of equipment's going to need to be replaced. That's our reserve to help fund that. So we're kind of down to that reserve at this point. So at this point, we're eating into the reserve, which is, putting us at risk in the future. But we've basically done 4 years out of, just over $2 million. In addition to that, we built, $1 million facility. We equipped this chamber, with our funding, did a job for Mill Valley, and we're about to do Fairfax. And we did the youth center when they were still in operation. So, we've been really careful about our spending. We've kind of maximized it and really stretched it out. So I think we've demonstrated that we're good. We're a safe investment, I think, for the MTA as far as the PEG fees are concerned. In addition, you have a lot of oversight over how we operate. You have 2 appointees on our board who are at our board meetings. Barbara and Suki come to every board meeting, get our financials every month. You practically do know every check that I write. I mean, everything's there. So I think we've built a lot of trust. I think we've earned it in the work that we've done and the accomplishments that we've made. And we've done that with a pretty small budget. And we talked about this the last meeting. Even with the Comcast money, the little bit of AT&T, this is still not going to meet our budget. And that's our challenge right now. Is how do we come up with how do we fund the deficit and move forward? So for us to have to start to be uncertain of whether we are going to get those PEG fees over the next few years until the 1% kicks in full in 2017 puts us under a lot of kind of financial duress and planning. I mean, my own board has asked me to do a 5-year budget. I've revised it 3 times in the last 2 months because the ground keeps shifting underneath us. I can't do a 5-year budget unless I can adequately project PEG revenues. So we want to be able to count on that. I think that's real important to our survival at this point, and especially our growth. We can't build and grow unless we know that we have, this revenue coming in.
Any other questions for Michael? Excellent, Michael.
Okay.
Well done. Any other comments from the public? Yeah, hi. Don't tell me, Mr. Nadal.
Nadal.
I got it.
Like the tennis player. My cousin. No. Anyway.
I won't say it. If I knew you a little bit better, I'd say something.
Well, anyway. No, I am Puerto Rican, really.
And so you say he gets a little more tennis than you do, right?
Oh, just a little bit more. Anyway, but hey, I'm glad to have the last name. But listen, I don't pretend to know anything about anything that everyone's talking about today. So if I'm out of line, I'm just trying to use these 3 minutes productively. But I do want to say that it sounds to me like what the kinds of things that I'm thinking about or that I'm trying to propose here today sort of might help with a lot of the problems that I'm hearing expressed here today, as far as how I would envision you guys solving all of these problems, or at least a good chunk of it anyway, with regards to the public channel, if nothing else, is that really it's all about a library today and having access to information and data and videos or information. And really that the web really kind of solves all of that for you. It would, what Comcast is running from is Google, basically, because Google is about to put out some services that are going to blow everything that Comcast could possibly offer out of the water. So it's in the city's interest to think about partnering with or buying from any high-speed internet service provider, and Barbara knows, at least I'm told anyway, she knows more about this than I do, so I'm not trying to be Mr. Technical advice here. But I am saying that if the city, for instance, had its own wireless signal, it could take all of those programs or whatever, put them all up on the web and let people download them as they see fit or need to, and programming could go as far and wide as you need to. What I want to emphasize here, though, is that with just very minor fees even of the public, you could ask the public for maybe $5 a year or something like that to get access to the wireless signal provided by the county or the city or whatever. And the point is that they would have access to all of these libraries. With that technology, we could do things like you could have all of the programming that these guys could come up with, for one, but for two, you could the budget for this stuff here would just be so much cheaper than the technology that you're using today to deliver the same product in much bigger galaxies of data. My point here today is to say that if the board does have any extra money, I would really like to see the money be used for educational purposes for the youngsters in our high schools and grade schools and junior high schools. The information that these kids have access to in other parts of the world is astounding, okay? And I'm just asking that you do what you can to give these kids access to wireless internet so that they can get access to this information. There's a thing, I'll close with this. There's a thing called the Khan Academy, and Microsoft and this other guy, I can't remember, well, his last name is Khan, actually, Khan. It's the Khan Academy, and I'm pretty sure probably someone around here knows about it, but it's access to information that kids can get, and they can get better at math, better at science, and that's what we really need. And if you have extra money, use it to give kids access to that, please. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Anybody else in the public want to speak? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for discussion and deliberation. And I think just to frame the discussion, let's treat these as the two sums. And just a quick straw man. Let's just talk about the Comcast settlement. Is there anybody that feels the media center should not get that 156 as soon as possible, the full amount? Just give it to them. Is there anybody that actually, because that was the recommendation of the Finance and Policy Committee, is give the 156 right over. Is there anybody who doesn't agree with that?
I'm good.
You're good? Are you good? Okay, so that takes care of part of our discussion. Let's go to the second. So that wasn't a motion yet, but at least we've got that off the table. So Michael, 156, good. Now, the second thing in terms of your 5-year planning, let's not discuss let's not discuss when and how yet, but is there any, same question, is there anybody that feels that the Comcast fees, the PEG fees, shouldn't go to the media center, all of them? Not discussing how or when, but is there anybody who says, boy, some of that money just should, to Lori's point, just stop right here? If anybody feels it shouldn't all just go over to the media center?
80% or 100%?
100% of it.
Recommendation is 80.
Well, no. The recommendation is not 80. No, the recommendation is all goes over. The recommendation should not be, where's that say 80%? No, that's the wrong report, Kate. You're the wrong report.
So out of date.
Yeah, you are the wrong
No wonder
report.
I had issues.
Yeah, Kate.
Gee.
That's the report.
This is good. This is bad.
That's the report.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So is there anybody who Larry?
Okay, I don't feel they shouldn't get the money, but I think for the benefit of, everybody here who doesn't have the background, if we were to retain any part of the money, PEG money, how would it be used? What other alternatives could it be used for? Or in what means of distribution?
I mean, Greg, that's your point. If it has to, it's not franchise fees. If you stopped it here, it just sits here in a fund.
It has to be used for PEG purposes.
Yeah, there's no.
So hypothetically, if San Rafael has this nice chambers here and they decided to do something outside of the CMCM's work or services, that if it were related to the G part of PEG, that they could use that money for that purpose?
That is true. Yeah, the members, if they were using it for their own governmental programming, money could be allocated to each member to be used for governmental programming.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted that stated for the record for people who have not been on this board when we had the discussion about the DAP agreements.
Right.
So, I was just trying to streamline the discussion to when and how, but I may not be able to get there. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I
Let's
think
have a discussion.
What the definition of the PEG funds might be, and even to Mr. Nadal's point, I mean, something that I've thought about for a long time is creating for example, a Wi-Fi zone in the canal, for example, to increase broadband access in a place where there isn't a lot of it. Would you be able to use PEG funds for that? Because perhaps through there they would be able to get the Marin TV website or access programming, or is that way too loose of a way to define that?
I would have to take a look at that more carefully there in terms of how that would end up actually being used. I really couldn't answer that question without knowing more about how the whole thing would be set up.
Okay. Where did you come out, though?
Chair, can I follow up on?
Go ahead.
What I think is important, and Mr. Nadal brought it up, and maybe it's already incorporated into the agreements that are out there in part of the DAP. But the world is moving at lightning speed. There are areas in Marin County, and Larry, you talked about West Marin earlier, that don't have the access, cable access or wireless access where they need it. There are elements in southern part of Marin City, may have some areas that need some help and support. So the only thing that I would ask that the board should ask itself, is there an opportunity, and Greg, to your comment, you need to do some more research on this. Is there an opportunity for the board to take some nominal sum, 5%, I'll just use it as an example, and just put it over here to look from a visionary standpoint, what could we do going forward that we haven't thought about before, that we can think about in the future to help some areas that need some support that perhaps other municipalities don't have the funds to do it. And maybe that little seed money that we might have, if we had the ability to direct it, could work in the Canal area, could work in the Marin City area, could work in another area in Marin County that perhaps is not getting somebody's attention right now. And I would just ask the board to think about that. That's all.
Chair. I think there are a lot of unmet media needs in our community, whether it's getting fiber to West Marin or internet to Marin City or the Canal. But it's kind of a zero-sum game that we're facing, because the agency that we founded in order to meet community needs as defined by our community needs assessment is CMCM. And it is on a very skeletal budget the way it is. And I agree with you. I mean, I know, there are a lot of unmet needs beyond the mission that we've set up for the Community Media Center. But my concern is that we don't sort of slowly starve that endeavor in order to take on these other projects. So, that's my concern, because when I look at the 5-year projections, for example, the Community Media Center runs out of capital improvement funds in 3 years. They can't replace equipment. The operating budget is frozen for the next probably 5 years. So it is on a very, strict diet right now. And it is our best, and it's been proven to be effective as a means of meeting our community needs. And so that's where I'm coming from. That's kind of the desperation in my tone, is that we don't sort of try to expand our reach for good purposes. Because I know there's a lot of unmet needs that we should be discussing and analyzing and trying to get funding for. But I think, as much of a cliche as it is, we need to take care of our original commitment and our original project taken care of until it's flying. And, with the resources we're talking about now, it will go forward. It will survive until, we get the expansion of PEG. But I really don't want us to lose sight of the fact that this is the designated vehicle for meeting community needs here in Marin.
Hey, Larry raised a good point, and I know that Michael raised the 5-year. The reason everyone's thinking about 5 years, because you understand after the 5 years, they get 100% of the fees. And it's not that also isn't a panacea, but it's a lot better. So we're just kind of go through the bulge period here.
I understand that.
Okay, good. Carolyn. Okay, who else? Hi, Rupert. What's going on?
We spent we spent a ton of time with the litigation trying to save CMCM, and the understanding was always that the whole purpose of trying to get this money out of Comcast was to dedicate it to CMCM. So I don't really understand the discussion in many ways that we're having tonight. I'm in the same boat as Larry, even though I often look at things somewhat differently to Larry. But just as a practical matter, what is it we've just spent the last year or two doing if it wasn't for this purpose?
So the recommendation from the Finance and Policy Committee was give it all to them. It was just, how do you do that? So what I'm hearing, and I think Larry said it too, even though he made his comment, which was a good point, he would be in favor of giving it all to them. You would be in favor of giving it all to them. Larry Bragman would be in favor of giving it all to them. Is there anybody who isn't in favor of giving it all to them? So we'll take a vote in a minute, but you got that piece now. So now it's just, now how do you do that? I mean, it's either contractually, we just, like we did the DAP agreement, it's contractually for a piece of it, or I guess Jim's point would be, you know, it could be all discretionary, we just do it annually or the beginning of the year. You could do a hybrid. You could say, I'm going to give 70% of it to them contractually, and you could have milestones for the other discretionary, knowing it's all going to you. Knowing it's all going to you. I don't want to open up the public hearing yet. You want to go?
I just wanted to clarify something.
What would you like to color?
Well, I mean, the funding would be attached to the DAP agreement.
Right.
That's the
Well,
understanding we have.
right.
And that's, we work together to define what the parameters.
That's the last recommendation.
Yeah.
Right, and that's that's why the last recommendation is get a committee here to work with you on the DAP. That's why we said that. Understood.
So I guess if you ask my opinion, I don't want to modify any agreements. I believe in giving them crack as to what it's going to feel like in 2017. Just have a pass-through system in place that allows us to just, at one meeting once a year or whatever, we just pass it through exactly what it is. It's their money, and well, in the sense in other words, I don't want to give myself more work here. I don't believe that we're doing anything that important at this time. We used to, but now we don't. Now we're just, playing government here. There was a time when this body was important, and we've done what we set out to do, and so now we should just go find something else to do.
Andy, I'd be glad to make the point I made at F&P. Yeah, I mean, we're the oversight board that deals with ratepayer funds, and essentially we are responsible for the decisions that we make with these dollars.
Correct, and that's for that reason that I want to remain arm's length from that money as well, so that we're not having to answer questions. That's their questions to answer.
And that's just fine. But we needed to have this conversation tonight to be accountable for our responsibility and our duty.
So are you saying
that's not unimportant? That's our role. So that's the first point that I just wanted to make. I think the longer term view of this is I feel very comfortable with the performance of CMCM, and I think that's why the faith of the F&P committee was there in giving the money to them. I am concerned a little bit long-term about philosophy or principle of we just hand the money over. I mean, the DAP agreement is the agreement and helps make sure that the intent of this agency is carried through by CMCM and by their board.
I allowed you to interrupt me, and I'll interject just a second.
I'm sorry.
No, but we can do it back and forth. I don't take umbrage.
I'll take it.
As long as we have that money and we're handing it over, we're still exercising that control. It's still within our purview because we are the hander-overs. And we don't have to relinquish that. It doesn't have to come directly from wherever that money comes from. It comes through here. I understand that. I'm just saying attaching a string is just another reason to have a meeting. And I'm not big on these unless we're actually doing something important, which with this part of it, I don't think we're really doing anything that critical, and other than making them fret about whether any of us is pissed off at them for whatever reason. We're worried about whose butt are they going to kiss over here, who's angry. So rather than having them worry about that, they know they got it coming, and that's the end of it. If they screw it up, we can just say, wait a minute, hang on a minute, and we can go ahead.
So, just so I understand, are you advocating give it to them contractually or have it come to us each year?
comes to us and goes to them directly without any.
But you wouldn't you wouldn't put it into a
No
contract.
amendments. No, why amend something that's going to expire in 13 anyway?
Because they would probably want it contractually, actually. They would
Well, of
want
course they do.
would want
Of
us to be a breach of
course they
contract
do.
if
But
we-
then,
if we
but
failed to
then,
give
but
it to
that's
them.
called check and balance, right?
Andy,
So I did
Go
want
ahead.
to.
Yeah, I know. I know that. Yeah, you got the floor.
I have to remember what it was after. So there are a couple of things. One is, we want to see CMCM be incredibly successful, wildly beyond our dreams, as if they had 10 times the amount of money that we're even able to provide them, they were able to find outside of us to do what we want them to do and what their board wants them to do. The DAP agreement, which is another agenda item where people will work on it, and I wish I had more time where I would be able to work on that, but that is where we as policymakers ask or commit CMCM to carry out what we believe is what the role of the DAP that uses those PEG funds will do. It's an incredibly important action, not just for this agency, but for Marin County or for the jurisdiction, and not to be taken lightly. And we need to set those priorities. And I'm not saying that the priorities of the DAP are off or wrong at all. I don't think that they should be sitting here fretting, and I think they'd be pleased with where we are, the outcome of our work would be, even if they were at home watching this on the web. I'm sure they wouldn't be watching basketball or something else if they were at home. They'd still want to watch this. Am I right? But we do need to take the time as we look at that DAP agreement and decide, are public policy goals in the DAP agreement, are they being carried out, and have they changed? And as we've had a DAP agreement and we've had very limited funds, and they've unfortunately not been able to raise a lot of funds to allow them to do everything that they want to do. So as Larry said, it is a zero-sum game. But as more revenue is available, what are our public policy goals and priorities, and what would we like them to do with that? Unfortunately, it's not more revenue than what is enough. It's just more revenue right now. But it's an important exercise that we go through. I mean, it's not just an exercise. I mean, we really need to deliberate about those things. We have talked about other goals that this agency has. So aside from wanting CMCM to be very successful, we have talked from time to time about broadband access or other strategic goals that we have. How do we pursue those goals? And, it's not something that we're incapable of doing, of talking long-term strategically about pursuing serving those unmet needs while also trying to set up, as we have somewhat successfully. I think we should pat ourselves on the back for what we've accomplished this year in making sure that we do have enough revenue or more revenue to provide for our DAP provider, which happens to be CMCM. So I don't mind us having this dialogue. I think it's important that we think about it. And so I'm glad that we had this opportunity to do it, both at F&P and here tonight.
Larry, you want to say some stuff?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I don't need to repeat anything Mark said. Conceptually, I agree with him, and I think we ought to just let whatever direction the board provides to the DAP committee to work out the, strategic planning related goals that we want CMCM to be able to carry out on our behalf as we represent the public. As far as distribution of money, that really comes down to probably should be no worse than our cash flow. So as we receive it, that would probably be an appropriate time to distribute it. I mean, the cities still continue to have heartburn about the whole fact that we have to fund the MTA for a whole year during the period in which we have the least amount of cash, because April to December is typically our period, the longest period that we don't have it, and that's where we end up funding it. So the MTA should not be placed in a similar position as well. So when we get our quarterly payments, then we distribute it.
So you would be in favor of, at the time we get our quarterly payments, not contractually the DAP, but have the DAP?
Either that, or we got to carry a higher reserve, which we'll talk about in the next, section.
Okay, so can I just take a quick, just down the line, Lori, would you do it contractually, or would you do it as we get the money in?
As we get the money.
Carolyn?
That's
we get the money.
No question, it goes to them, but as we get the money. Larry, as we get the money.
As
Kate?
we get it.
As we get it, as we get it.
I guess as we get it, but could I just
Yeah,
make
absolutely.
one comment? We're on the last 12 months of the STAP, which took a long time to draft. So, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel right now. The DAP covers performance standards. There's 2 pages of it in the DAP. I think it's probably worth considering changing or maybe amending some of the performance standards when we get into June, when it comes time to renew it on June 30th, 2013. But right now, the most important thing for them and for us, because I think there is a mutuality of interests here, is to make sure that their funding stream is secure. So I would say whatever is the most secure funding for them, which I would assume would be pay it when we get it. So there's no waiting, so there's some cash flow for them. But I think the current DAP should be amended to reflect that, just with a paragraph.
Yeah, but that's the issue. I think folks are saying, do it when you get it, don't do it contractually. That's kind of the question.
Oh, I don't think they're mutually
No,
exclusive.
yeah, let me just clarify a point here, because, I mean, the way the agreements work right now with AT&T is contractual, but we don't pay it until we receive it. So in other words, you could have a provision in the contract that says we will pay it when we receive it.
Right.
And I think this is the point, is whether or not you're just assigned as a motion to direct that the monies be paid as it comes in, or whether you would add that same idea just into the contract, saying that when the monies are received, contractually, you will pay the money over to CMCM.
Mark?
What he said.
Rupert?
Yeah, I agree.
We'll have plenty of opportunity next year to spend money on.
Yeah,
legal
they
fees.
asked to, that's fine. We'll have a DAP renewal discussion in a couple of minutes. Okay, so let me summarize and someone give me a motion. We entertain a motion to give to adopt the recommendation of the Finance and Policy Committee to put the 156 Comcast settlement money directly to the CMCM right now, and the Comcast PEG fees would be paid as we receive them, and then direction to the, we would have to, I guess everyone's saying don't amend the DAP agreement right now, right? So don't spend that money. Is that accurate, folks?
When you're ready, I'll move exactly what you just said.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion from our team tonight, Michael and Supervisor. Motion second. Any discussion on the motion? Any opposition to the motion? Motion carries. Okay, good. All right, let's move on. Thank you, everybody. Let's move on to the DAP Renewal Committee. So, Barbara, quick staff report.
Yeah, as mentioned, our current DAP expires June 30th, 2013, and it was suggested that we establish a DAP renewal committee of 2 board members, appoint those tonight so they can be in working on it, we can be out in front of the renewal.
Yeah, this came from a request from the Media Center. Get a little proactive, not wait till a year from now. How do people, any questions of staff? Any comments from the public on this? Michael?
I'm just going to use it as an opportunity to comment on something way back. Just briefly, PEG fees can only be used for PEG purposes, and that's just the stuff that gets delivered through the cable to your TV. Although I agree, I think getting things like internet access, greater availability in the canal and other areas, really important. There are state and federal funds. I think this agency should be, getting those funds and making that happen. There's stuff out there for that. As far as the DAP, yeah, we're eager to just help, work with you. If there's been any question about performance or focus, this is where we can really talk it out. The current DAP still has us living rent-free at the College of Marin.
Right.
That never happened. It really doesn't say anything about doing government and educational work or climbing ladders, right, which we've done. But it covers, it really is a contractual document. I encourage you all to read it because it covers a lot. And we do want to clarify that, and we're happy to work with you on it.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Any other comments from the public? Bill?
Bill Sims, CMCM board member. Yeah, just to add a little bit to Michael's comment. A lot of the DAP, almost every cent that we have spent over the last years has really been within the parameters of the DAP. And much of this has to do with you've planted a tree and we have to maintain it. One of the most significant requirements of the DAP was that we build, staff, and maintain a community media center and keep it open X hours a week. That takes money. And that's where our money has gone, a lot of it. And we can't let it die, you know. That's an ongoing obligation. We planted the tree. We need to nourish the tree. One other thing, too, to keep in mind, one of the features of the DAP is that we are contractually committed if at any time we're found in violation of the contract, or if we go out of business, or for any reason we can no longer comply with the DAP, we are committed to return all of the MTA monies to the MTA, including any equipment or other things that we bought with those monies. So it's not like you're sending the money off into a black hole, is the point I want to leave you with. We're in this together. In a way, it's all still government money. And we're spending a lot of that government money on the oversight provisions, the annual audits, and so forth. So these are all things that can be dealt with under the DAP, and I think the DAP is a pretty good document. We've been living with it very successfully for 5 years. I'm not saying that it doesn't need a tweak or two, but I think it's a good starting point, and I would commend that, or ask each of you to take a look at it, and if you see problems, you know, bring them up and we'll deal with them.
Great, thanks, Bill. Anybody else in the public? I'm going to time you. These guys know me. I'm flipping this over.
Hey, I want equal time. I want fair time. Anyway, all right, but listen, I just wanted to impress upon the board here that I'm not here to.
Is this about the DAP agreement?
Yes.
Okay.
Because what I'm not trying to do here.
Pete, what you've told us.
I'm not.
Okay.
What I am saying is that inside of the agreement, what the board should do is try to advance the technologies that are being allocated for, so that they can be used by future technology, and so that the current state of equipment is more widely accessible simply by adding things like wireless routers and other provisions will make the signal more available. For instance, at the libraries or at the schools, these types of provisions will make the
the only reason I'm doing this to you,
equipment available.
Yeah, the only reason I'm doing this to you because we haven't even decided if we're going to have a committee even look at this stuff yet. But so that, you know what I'm saying, just keep it in the context of the issue before us is there an interest in having any of us help renew that agreement sooner? Otherwise, the agreement sits as it is. So
right.
That's the context of what we're discussing here.
Well, what I'm just trying to, okay, I get your point, but what I'm trying to say is, and I'll try to narrow it here.
Committee, renew that agreement, and think about these issues that should be into it when we renew it.
Thank you. Yeah,
and they're great issues. I think you've gotten a lot of great attention from people here. So what you should do, I think that would be helpful, is get a copy of the agreement and send a letter to staff that says these are the things. If you go to renew this agreement, these are the kinds of things you should think about.
Yeah, that's
to put into that agreement, because that will be very, very helpful.
I'm happy to do it.
You want another minute? Just I didn't mean to cut you off. I want to be very respectful because you have very nice ideas.
Well, thank you. Well,
1 minute you get though.
All right, thanks. Well, what I'd like to do is try to answer some questions, because what I do know about what when I talk to people is that they sometimes don't understand the technology and how advanced it could actually, what implementing it can do for the advancement of information. And I'm not a genius on the subject, but I do know that Microsoft is investing in communities that have these type of things that are getting information out. And so if it's a question of money, I don't want to do anything that necessarily restricts the budget for the DAPT agreement, but just to say that if we add these modifiers to it, it'll attract outside investors such as Microsoft.
Thank you. Anybody? Thank you. Excellent comments. Anybody else from the public? I'm going to close the public hearing. Is there any interest by anybody on this board to have a couple of us just start looking at the DAP agreement early? It was created. It became a request from them. There was a request from here. It was created before any of this existed. And in hindsight, it's pretty darn good, as Bill said, but it's not perfect, and there's things that weren't there, and we want to get ahead of the curve. Is there any interest in, does anybody even have interest?
No, what I would like to see is them send us a letter of things that they want to change, and then we can talk about that one. Instead of us going on some mining expedition, they've been dealing with it directly.
Well, we know you don't want to be on the committee.
No. However, they obviously have some issues. Let them send us those grievances, and then we'll act on those specific points.
Okay. Does anybody feel differently? Carolyn?
Yes, I think we should appoint a committee of 2 people to meet with CMCM and discuss what they'd like to see and bring it back to the board for a review.
Okay. Does it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree with Carolyn, but I'd like to go even further without availing myself. By saying that this committee should really think about forwarding and advancing to this board what we want out of our DAP. And that's critically important here for us, as much as learning from CMCM how we can help them be more successful and what they need out of that DAP as well.
No, I mean, I personally, I treat these like vendor relationships. You're constant, you meet quarterly and see how's everything going. We don't do this at all with you, although Larry's on the board. How do other people feel? I know how you feel. Larry doesn't have the time. Carolyn's not going to be. She has a great idea, but she doesn't want to. She's not going to be able to help. Larry, you're on their board.
Yeah, but before we launch into a subcommittee that's investigating a huge area, it might be worth getting a hold of somebody like Tom Robinson and having him check in with us, because this institution was not founded by a group of elected officials getting together and determining what it should do and what we need to do. We hired somebody who did actual surveys in the community. They did telephone surveys. They did technology surveys. They went in depth to really look at what the community needs as far as community media, and that is why we founded the Media Center. So I just think, I like the idea of sort of making the Media Center, giving them a proactive role in getting back to us on what they feel are the weaknesses or the ambiguities or, whatever is lacking, the deficits in our DAP. But I'm a little hesitant to appoint the committee to investigate issues that are very, very broad. So
it's going to come on us in a year. Just know that
and I think we should be getting ready for it. And
that's
I'm
all
just
we're
saying,
asking.
As individuals, formulating ideas for when that meeting comes for discussion.
Larry?
And maybe checking back in with our media consultant.
Correct. Maybe something like that. But
yeah, I think I just look at this completely differently, and maybe it's because I stepped into this after CMCM was founded. I see CMCM as being an independent nonprofit that has its own mission. We have selected to go into an agreement with them for them to serve as our DAP. They can do a lot more than just be our DAP. They happen to be dependent upon us for so much of their funding, and they're mostly they really comply with the DAP to do a lot of what they do. But I see them as an independent nonprofit. So I'm a little concerned about the use of this term investigation. It's not a witch hunt at all. We have an agreement with them to carry out a very important role for our community, and so it's important for us to make sure that we're asking them to pursue our goals and help them be as successful as possible, and hearing from them about how a DAP agreement can help them do that as best as possible. So it's not some subcommittee that goes off on a witch hunt and investigates injustices or improprieties, which is what that kind of sounded like to me, but more of a working group to help us figure out how do we get the most out of our DAP for everybody and for the community.
Isn't this a bit of a waste of time? Shouldn't we just find out whether we've got two people who are willing to spend the time on it? If
Well,
we've got two
that's
people,
what-
let's do it. If we haven't, let's not spend more time on it.
That's where I'm going next.
No,
No, Carolyn,
but I
is anybody interested in doing this and wants to step up to this?
Well,
Okay, no.
yeah,
I'm going to volunteer. You're stuck with me. All right? That's just what it's going to be. It's not going to be a formal committee unless anybody has any big objections. I have absolutely no time. You guys know exactly what it's like to work with me. But I personally think we will be doing both of our sides a disservice to sit around for 6 or 8 months and then say, oh, we got to deal with this issue in 4 months. So to everybody's point, I would love, I'm looking at Bruce because I can work very effectively with you. Not that I can't work effectively with the others, but I think, Bruce, you and I should just, you get your end. I think I have a pretty good sense of what people here, their sensitive buttons are. And let's just, maybe you and I just make some recommendations for what this thing ought to look like a year from now.
Great.
And we have a whole year to do it, so between you and Saudi Arabia and me and who knows where, we can figure, that's kind of, is everybody fine with that? Okay, yeah, we have a whole year, we ought to be able to fit it in. It's going to be really hard. We're going to be right at our deadline, I can tell already. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
But I think we should get ahead of the curve. You guys have asked for it, and I don't want to leave this till 8 months from now, because we can't leave it till 12 months. It is going to end. Done with that one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The audit, and engagement letter and appointing an audit committee. Barbara. These next ones are quick, folks. I'm actually tracking to a 2-hour meeting, and I've got 3 minutes, but I don't know if we'll get to it.
I'll make this one very short.
Yeah, let me make it short.
Yeah.
Bill Sims is leaving already.
Uh-oh.
About section D that Sims wanted, nix that.
Okay, it's the time of year for us to engage an auditor to do our fiscal year 12 audit. At times in the past, when our audit engagement letter has come up, the board has asked, well, should we consider changing auditors? And so I worked with John Maher this year to talk to him what would be the normal practice and recommendations. And he shared with us, and I attached it in this package, a letter regarding changing auditors. And the primary concern there is either you're getting a bad audit or there is some concern about independence. And he said the way that we can ensure independence is to establish an audit committee, maybe of a couple of people that can work with him before, during, and after the audit to ensure that it's independent from staff.
Laura, you signed up to do this?
Yeah, I guess I did.
Wow, fantastic.
Okay, financial is about the only thing I do understand here, okay?
Are you good with this? Because that's the recommendation. That's great. Fantastic. Wonderful.
Okay.
I'm not going to let you speak anymore.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any issues with what's being presented here? I mean, we do this every year with Maher. We want to move this ahead. The same issues come up. I personally, we wanted the right controls, and we add an extra level of control. So we'll go forward with Maher, but add a little extra level of control with you two, folks on my right. You good with that? Yeah. Okay, can we entertain a motion?
I'd like to move the recommendations.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
That's loud.
Who seconded it? Larry. So we got Mark on the motion. We have a motion and a second. Larry Bragman on the second. Any discussion on the motion? Any opposition to the motion? Motion carries unanimously. Oh, I didn't even have any public open time on that. Bruce, did you want, Mr. Nadal, you're not allowed to speak on this. Has nothing to do with internet access in the county. If I give you a chance, you're going to come up. I can tell you already. Bruce, you're good, right? Okay, thank you. So item K, which is approving the MTA reserve policy. Can we have, I think maybe, should Larry, you want us to give it like a, you want to do this, or who wants to do that?
You can do it if you like.
Larry, you want to do the, go ahead.
You should do it as the executive officer.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Reserve policy, this had come up asking about what our reserve policy has been and what it should be. As I mentioned earlier, we generally had been retaining about $150,000 at the end of the year. Working with John Maher, his recommendation was that since we get our budget dollars with the second quarter PEG fees, which we receive in August of the year, that it would be appropriate for us to retain in our reserve an amount to cover our first quarter of our new year expenses, because we would not be receiving those PEG fees which fund that until August sometime. So in this case, say for this year, our fiscal year budget for the agency only is $326,000. So and we're pretty flatline throughout the year. So our reserve would be about $82,000.
Larry, do you want to add anything to the staff report?
I think from a simplistic standpoint, the whole idea is that we have such flat inflows and outflows that are on a predictable basis that the only reason you would need to have a reserve is just enough to cover when we don't have the cash until we get it. So that was the rationale behind it.
Okay. Any questions of staff? Okay, going to open up the public hearing. Any comments from the public? I'm going to close the public hearing, bring it back to the board for discussion, deliberation, or a motion.
I'd like to move the recommendation.
For the motion, we have a second.
Second.
Who was that? Carolyn?
Yes.
So Mark on the motion, Carolyn on the second. Motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Any opposition to the motion? Motion carries unanimously. Greg, item L, and you thought you wore us down, but I saved two, because we started 5 minutes, we have 2 minutes, a whole 2 minutes, and we have 2 items. No, item L, which is about an amendment to the general services contract. Barbara.
Yes. Greg Stepanovich has been our general counsel since 1998. The last increase in his fees was in July of 2002, 10 years ago. He's now requesting an increase to $325. I'm sorry, $275 per hour.
Did you see his face? He was like, wow!
That wasn't an amendment.
Yeah.
Another $50 is, we're going to put that towards wireless access, Mr. Nadal?
Yeah, and so that seems reasonable after 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's comparable with what you're charging to MEA?
Yes, that's
right.
right.
Right, okay. So any questions of staff? All right, any opening the public hearing, closing the public hearing, bring it back to the board for any discussion, deliberation, and a motion.
I'll move it.
We have Kate motioned, Michael seconded. Any discussion? We have a motion, a second. Any discussion on the motion? Any opposition to the motion? Motion carries. Greg, I will say, now that the timing couldn't have been perfect after everything's done with Comcast. You bring this to us, so it was brilliance on your part. So your sound and good judgment but you 10 years without a rate increase is for those of us that have practiced law. Honestly, it's just. Really, thank you very much for your service. Absolutely. Okay, moving on. So item M, board election update, Barbara.
Yeah, on this, generally, we have our board elections in January. This year, we decided not to defer them until after we got through the lawsuit so that we have consistency in leadership. At this point in time, it was discussed at the Finance and Policy Committee, and they suggested, and Andy agreed, that he would continue till the end of the year. Mark Levine is our vice chair, if the board would agree to that.
Yeah, the real question, the real issue is we didn't want to think people, we were supposed to do this in January for all the right reasons. We did not do changes then. We didn't want people to think we forgot about it, but it is, it's already June. We're not meeting again for 2 months, so that's what we're talking about here. I mean, if there's and from the bottom of my heart, if somebody actually wants to step in here I mean, we can do a whole election, it's not a big deal.
Before he changes his mind, I'd like to move the recommendation.
Second.
Yeah, motion second, all right, motion second, you have that, Suki, Larry, who made the motion? Larry made the motion, Jim made the second. Motion second, any discussion on the motion? Any opposition to the
I
motion?
think we should have it for 5 years.
There's
We
no
need a
way.
5-year plan.
No value to two-term limit. So motion carries unanimously. Our next meeting, then we're going to entertain a motion to adjourn until August. By the way, Strupple, is everybody here in August? I know it's kind of a...
August 8th would be our regular
August 8th?
meeting.
I mean, I'm here, so let's
That's
keep the,
okay. Yeah.
August, and then we wouldn't meet again till October, and then the Finance and Policy Committee is probably in the middle. All right, look, have a great summer. We'll see you all in August. Congratulations again, Mark, Greg, thank you for your services. Barbara, good work getting the staff report out on time. Let's do that again. Okay.
Well
thank
done,
you.
Berman.
All right, guys, thank you. 9:07.
Excellent. Yes.